All right, guys, we're going to welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be discussing James Franklin getting fired at Penn State, 10 winning seasons out of his 11 years for the Nittany Lions, and he got canned earlier this afternoon after a disappointing start after losses to UCLA and Northwestern. We're going to sit here and discuss his, this situation, and then, of course, we're going to look at 5 candidates to replace him there in College Park. And to get things started, kind of a monologue from me, Nick, I think that, for Penn State to fire James Franklin the same year that Florida and Florida State are going to likely have openings is very bold and something that could honestly cause them to land a B tier candidate. The results in those big time games and the upside in the program had certainly been capped, and obviously that's why a lot of people anticipated him to be canned, right? And the results are not pretty in those big time games. Weeks ago, I said that he'd be the next head coach of the Florida Gators, and this really frees him up to go do that. And clearly, Florida or Penn State, that is, feels the same way like now in terms of timing. I don't know if it was the right move. He should have probably been given a little bit more respect. Obviously, things happen fast in this sport, and I felt that way when Mike Gundy was fired after like 18 straight winning seasons, had one losing year, starts the year below 500, and he gets canned instantly by his alma mater. This is a guy that was a couple plays away from winning the national title, or having a berth to the national title and winning the Orange Bowl just a few months ago, Nick. And this is a guy who took this program from some very dark times and turned them into contenders. They have these expectations of winning national championships and winning the Big Ten and all that because of his elevation of the program, right? Like he set those expectations of his results, and he's done a lot in terms of giving his staff opportunities, taking recruits and putting them into the NFL. Penn State has evolved in the tight end university. 2016, his staff, for example, had 4 future head coaches alone and a few other guys that could be head coaches somewhere else, for example. So, this is a guy who's still a great coach. He's a great recruiter. I think he's going to be great for the Florida Gators because I think he's still going to end up there in November or December. And I don't think for a second he can't succeed with a fresh start. And obviously, this is probably good for both parties where, Brian Kelly left Notre Dame because he's like, I've taken these guys as far as I can go. And I think that's kind of the situation Franklin's in, right? And obviously, he's had some of his own poor coaching decisions in a lot of these big time games. And it's because of those results, right, are in his head. It's clear and it's evident. And I think a fresh start could certainly allow him to think of a clearer mind. 2025, poor results, no way around it, right? It's inexcusable, especially when you brought Jim Knowles in. Lots of other coaches, though, have earned different opinions over the years by barely being on the other side of the stick in a lot of those big time program defining games, right? So it's like Franklin could easily have flipped the narrative on his tenure, just wasn't able to. And the thing is, they were always right there, right? It's not like they're getting blown out consistently. They're always right there. Almost won the Orange Bowl. Almost always beat Ohio State. And guess what? Sometimes it's better to have the opportunities than to not be in the fold at all. And I know I'm just the Franklin sympathizer, right? And a lot of people are going to disagree with the things I say, and I'm not going to fight you on it. I totally understand. But I don't know if this was right, Nick. You seen what Wisconsin did. We fired our head coach because we thought we were tired of 10 wins a year. We're not probably going to make a bowl game the rest of the decade at this point. So you have to be sure this is the right thing for your program. Franklin had 3 straight winning seasons of 10 plus games before this year. Obviously, they underdelivered significantly, and they're going to end up at like 4-8. I don't know. I just feel like the respect was just not given to Franklin, Nick, and it's kind of a dark day, quite frankly, at Penn State.
I have a lot of mixed moments and mixed opinions on this. I said last week on the Best Bets episode that if Penn State was a self-respecting football program, they would fire James Franklin. And obviously, I didn't expect it to happen right now. I didn't think they would lose to Northwestern. I figured they would fire him at the end of the season. I thought that'd be the right move. Didn't think it would happen on October 12th. I mean, they played in the Orange Bowl on January 9th of 2025, and 9 months later, just over 9 months later, on October 12th, you're firing a guy after over 10 seasons. Crazy, right? It's just things move fast in college football in the NIL era. Things are happening so quickly, and I think this is going to be the right move ultimately. I think this is going to make sense in the long term because again, I think that this was a team that's capped out. He's never going to really be able to push them to the top. They brought back a lot of talent. They brought back a quarterback that some people thought could be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, a guy that could be a Heisman favorite. Of course, you and I were not exactly as high on their quarterback who is now out for the season. So this is certainly a punt season for Penn State, and I understand why they made the move. The quarterback's done for the year. You just punt on this season at this point, end up in a bowl game, and see what you can do from there. They paid Jim Knowles a lot of money to be the defensive coordinator for this team. They brought back a ton of talent, brought back their top 2 running backs, who they misused woefully this year, in my opinion. They're not getting the best out of either of those backs and really just not making things work in that regard. And I think the writing was on the wall with Penn State because, yeah, they started off 3-0, but they didn't look great against the likes of Nevada, FIU, Villanova. No Power 4 wins through the middle of October. Just really not good at all. And then obviously the Oregon game. They were in that game. They were super competitive, but they ended up losing that one and it just completely fell apart. He totally lost the team. And at this moment in time, there was no saving this. So I think this makes a lot of sense. 104 and 45 record at Penn State. Yeah, that's a phenomenal record. And he really took this program out of the depths that was a proud football program that got hit with bad sanctions for a very good reason, right? The sanctions were certainly earned, but they were deep down in the dumps. They were in a bad spot. He ended up bringing them back to relevancy, took them to a bowl game every single season except the COVID year where they were offered a bowl, but a losing record. They declined to take that bowl. Outside of that, he took them to a bowl game every single season, won a Big Ten title in 2016, played in the Rose Bowl that year, went to the Ten title game last year in a season where people didn't expect that out of that team at all, and was really able to get them to a great spot. But he had reached his limit. The team was capped, and it was clear that they were not going to be able to get over the hump. $48 million seems like a lot, but in this day and age, the money, you have to pay it up. You got to pay the buyout if you think this coach isn't working anymore. I didn't think it would happen right now, but it does. And the grass isn't always greener, right? You can look at Nebraska. They ended up moving on from their coach, Bo Pelini, and that didn't work out for them. They took forever to get back to relevancy. Michigan, they moved on from coaches, and it didn't work out. Wisconsin, you mentioned them. That's another great example. It doesn't always work out when you move on from a coach and when you're a top level program, but sometimes you got to roll the dice to hit the right guy. And there's some interesting names out in the market. Penn State's an attractive job. I don't care what you say. It's still a top football school. They have all the heritage, all the fan support. They have one of the best stadiums in the country, if not the best stadium in the country, depending on who you ask. So names will be interested. People will certainly be ready to jump into this. You're gonna have a fresh slate, right? Because you're gonna have a new quarterback. You're gonna really bring in a whole new team. So we'll be curious to see what that looks like. They didn't fire any other staff right now. The staff is still in place in terms of other pieces. So Knowles is still there. Some other guys are still there. They didn't clean house. They just fired the guy at the top. I'm curious to see what direction they go. Obviously, we'll lay out a couple of names here, which I think will be a very interesting coaching search. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is you make a great point, right? With other jobs open, like Florida, potentially like Florida State's, like some other top jobs, someone's going to get a bad candidate because there's not enough good candidates to go around. The supply and demand's not going to match. So some teams going to get left out at the dance and not have a good hire, and it will certainly set their program back. I'm just curious who's going to get in trouble on the carousel. I don't think it will be Penn State, but I'm curious to see who Florida and Florida State will end up going if they end up opening those jobs because someone could get left out of the dance big time, and it'll be certainly curious to see what happens in that regard.
This will also obviously have a big ripple effect when it comes to recruiting and roster turnover. The top running back for 2027 was committed to PSU. He's went ahead and decommitted. They also had another top 30 recruit, I think, on the offensive line who decommitted as well. And you're going to see a lot of those over the next couple of weeks. Drew Aller, torn ACL. I don't think he's going to the NFL at this point, so he's going to probably look for a change of scenery in 2026, and I think he'll be a top option in the portal for a program. A lot of other big-time talents on this roster might look to follow Franklin elsewhere if he indeed takes a job for 2026. So a lot is going to come of this, Nick. All of it's not going to be felt at this moment, but this offseason is definitely going to be a very interesting one. We're going to go ahead and jump into those candidates. Getting things started, Matt Rhule, of course, is the name you're going to hear most currently over at Nebraska. Penn State alumni. This is a guy who played a linebacker for them back in the early to mid 90s. And of course, he's known as a guy who's a program builder. Took Temple from 2-10 to 10-4 in just a matter of a couple seasons. Baylor 1-11. They won 11 games just 2 years later, and now Nebraska's on a similar trajectory as well. Biggest problem here is Matt Rhule potentially tired of just bouncing around all the time because he's been out of school for 3 years and leaves. Was at the NFL for a couple of years, bounced back to college. I mean, he's just a guy that does not have much longevity, and maybe this is the program he can see himself at for the next decade, though. So it's certainly a thing you got to weigh, right? Because he doesn't stick around for long, but maybe this is the job he's been looking for here in State College. And this is also a guy who's known as a program builder, and it seems like it'd be a little bit easier at Penn State as they're recruiting. Maybe we'll topple Nebraska's right, I think, most certainly, because this is a team that can haul in top 10, top 15 classes, while Nebraska certainly has to contend for those. If he wants to do this immediately, though, I don't know if his quarterback, Raiola, would come with him. But this is a guy that nonetheless has found success at all CFB programs. I talked about the ripple effect, Nick. Penn State's going to feel it. That's something I'm sure the athletic director and his staff are aware of, that this is going to lead to them being on the downcline for a year or two. And Matt Rhule is comfortable in those situations. And since he was spent the most years of his football career at Temple, just up the road in Philadelphia for about a decade, this does make sense for a lot of reasons. Do you think Rhule is ready to pack up and leave yet another job?
Penn State alumni is obviously going to be one of the first names you look at when a big job like this opens up. And I certainly don't blame fans for taking a look at a guy that went to the school, played under Joe Paterno, obviously a pretty legendary thing to have on your resume. This is a guy that's a great coach, right? There's no way to beat around the bush there. He was great at Temple, right? Turned that program from really in the depths of despair into a relevant program, got Temple competitive, got Baylor competitive after their scandal, and really put them in a tough hole. His trip to the NFL was just a one-off, right? It was a bad decision, I think. I think he'll even say that it was dumb for him to go to the NFL. It just doesn't really work when coaches make that transition sometimes. But I would have to agree with your assessment. I just don't think he's going to leave Nebraska. I think he's in a really good spot right now. I think Penn State will certainly try to chase it, and they'll throw a lot of money potentially at him. But he's already making a pretty hefty salary at Nebraska. I believe 9.25 million is the number I read. Maybe wrong, around between 9 and 10 million, I believe, is the number he is getting there. And he's got Dylan Raiola. He's got that team humming at 5-1 and a good spot. This will certainly be tempting for Matt Rule, but I just can't see it happening necessarily. I just think it makes too much sense for him to stay in Nebraska, a team that's got a great fan support, great stadium, similar to that I mentioned, good NIL money down there in Nebraska as well. I just don't think it makes sense for him to continue bouncing around. I kind of agree with your assessment that I don't think he wants to really make moves like that again. I think he's comfortable where he is in Nebraska. Obviously, Penn State, I think it'll be a home run hire, right? This is a guy that can win. He's shown that he can get stuff done so far. He's been able to get, 10-win seasons at Temple and Baylor, post-sanctions Baylor. It's pretty impressive numbers, and he's on track for what looks like a potential 10-win season in Lincoln as well. That will be their first call. Will he pick up the phone? I'm not too sure. Certainly keep an eye on Matt Rule, but I'm not as confident in that. I don't feel like that's the guy they're going to end up getting, because I just don't think he's going to be the one that wants to take the job.
Now we're going to move down to Kurt Signetti. Obviously, this is going to be a hot coaching candidate. I think eventually he'll leave Indiana. I don't know if it's going to be this soon, but this is also a guy born in Pittsburgh. So, I mean, you got some familiarity, right? Some guys that potentially want to move back home. 17-2 already, 19 games at Indiana, coming off a phenomenal road victory over Oregon. They were able to beat them pretty handily after a dominant second half. This is a perennial bottom feeder program, Nick. They haven't been good for decades. They still have like a 20-30 game losing streak against Ohio State. I mean, Indiana still has a lot of things they're trying to rediscover when it comes to success in their football program. Signetti's doing that right off the bat. What I love most about him is he has a well-established staff, right? All the way back from his days at IUP and Elon, guys like Mike Shanahan, his offensive coordinator. They've been around since 2016. Bryant Haynes was also on that staff at IUP at 2014. They followed him from James Madison all the way here to Indiana, Nick, and they've had success all the way across the board. And I absolutely love that they've been around for so long at so many different destinations. It's just beautiful to see the love I think they have for each other. And that's why they're having so much success, because the familiarity and the lack of change has been great for him. And that's why he's had so much success. 52-9 at James Madison, of course. They were great at the FCS ranks, went up to the FBS and dominated. And now here they are contending legitimately for a national title so fast. If they hire him, Nick, you're getting his staff with them, and these guys clearly know what they're doing and have so much great chemistry. This is a great package deal for any team, and obviously a bidding war is going to ensue.
Seeing any hire would be quite interesting, because you're right. What would they do with the staff? I guess Jim Knowles would end up finding himself a different job. What would that look like? Certainly it's something you can push down the line. This is another one where I'm not super confident, right? I see his name obviously a lot of different places. He's headlining a lot of lists, and it makes sense. A lot of good reasons. Pennsylvania native, got his first head coaching job at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, IUP, which is a good spot for him to start. Was previously an assistant under Nick Saban, so obviously Nick Saban saw the talent in him. He was part of the first staff at Alabama for Nick Saban, and they ended up winning a national title, and he was really good there. He developed Julio Jones, Mark Ingram, some other pieces. So clearly he's a guy that can really coach. He took Elon, that was a bottom feeder program at the FCS level, got them to the playoffs twice. He took James Madison to a national championship game, 2 semifinals before they made the transition to the FBS, and they looked really good at 8-3 and 11-1. Then the story of last year. Indiana got to the playoffs. They're 6-0 right now, and they're probably one of the best teams in the country. They're certainly a top 3 team in the country, and they are absolutely playing dominant football. He went out and got a huge win at Oregon. Didn't expect that they would be able to pull off that upset. A phenomenal showing from him. Again, I don't know if Signetti has the appetite to take this move here. It would make a lot of sense, but this is an Indiana team that he's going to kind of be able to do what he wants with, and he's got his own staff in place. He's bringing the talent out of the portal. Mendoza seems to be an absolute hit out of the portal, who has been phenomenal. other pieces they've added have been really good. Elijah Sherrod's been phenomenal for that team. So I think he's going to stick it out Indiana. Again, I think this is somebody you're going to call if you're Penn State, but I just don't know if Cignetti's going to return your call. I just have a feeling that he's going to stay there. At 64 years old, too, I wonder how many moves he wants to make left in his career. A bit of a late bloomer onto the scene in terms of head coaching wise, but I think he's going to want to stick it out with Indiana. Would be a great hire for Penn State, but I just don't know if this is the type of guy that's going to take the job here right now. I think he's comfortable at IU. Take the chance, though. Obviously, you can make the call and see what you can do. A very interesting name that's going to be at the top of a lot of lists for this position.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's going to stay at the end of the day, but man, it'd be interesting. Looking at a bit of an oddball candidate here, Luke Fickell. A lot of people are going to say Manny Diaz. I'm going to go with the Wisconsin head coach. This is a guy who was once considered a hot commodity in the coaching cycle, right? He had great success for a number of years at Cincinnati, maybe even overstayed his time there, but he ended up putting up together, 6 great seasons. You made the playoffs, 3 seasons of 11 plus wins. He had 5 straight of 9 plus wins. I mean, this is a guy who did great work consistently at Cincinnati, passed up the USC job. Probably could have had the Notre Dame one as well, the LSU job. I mean, these are some top jobs he passed on, Nick, to eventually just settle with Wisconsin. I think he was just waiting for Ryan Day to get canned at Ohio State, and it just never happened, right? And that kind of forced his hand into a bad decision at Wisconsin, where, again, we alluded to them firing Paul Chryst because they were sick of winning 10 games. And now it seems like Fickle's kind of in over his head, sitting at 15 and 17, just got annihilated at home by Iowa in games they would typically contend in or win. That bowl streak at Wisconsin of 20-plus years got ended last year. I don't think that discredits his coaching ability at all, Nick. This is still a guy that is a great defensive coach. He can clearly build a program, and I think he has great connections in this conference. But obviously, things are very tough at Wisconsin. And again, in over his head is the word. And I think he'd still do a great job with these extended resources that Penn State is going to be able to provide. I don't think this would be a bad alternate option. I don't think he'll be their top candidate, but if that's who they have to make the call to, I think this would make a lot of sense. I know that the Penn State fans probably wouldn't like it. I think a lot of people in college football circles would be shaking their head, but to me, it would make a lot of sense because even though Wisconsin, things are not going great, he's really struggling to elevate them to those new highs that they had hoped. This is still a great coach, and I think you could put all of that record over the last 4 years behind you, and I think you would do great at Penn State.
Now, this is some outside the box thinking. Penn State fans, they would hate it. They would not like this move, and a lot of top analysts in college football wouldn't like this move. But I would like this move. I think this makes a lot of sense. This is a guy that he has a great resume. He was a coach temporarily at Ohio State, obviously taken over in 2011. That was, solid. He ended up doing okay there. They ended up having losing seasons, but he was really trying to recover that program that was going through some issues. Obviously, the interim coach when Jim Tressel was going through his suspensions, and then ended up at Cincinnati where he turned a program that was pretty bad. He went 4-8 his first season, then rattled off 2 straight winning 11 win seasons. First G5 team in the playoff where they ended up losing Alabama. That was a strong season. Also lost a close Peach Bowl contest in 2021 to Georgia where they were 9-1 during the COVID year. So he was able to do a lot of great things. It looked like a home run hire for Wisconsin, but it obviously just has not worked out. I don't really know what's going wrong at Wisconsin. It's really tough to kind of put a finger on it because it just doesn't make any sense. You figured it would work out. He did probably kind of overstay his welcome at Cincinnati. He probably should have bolted after that playoff appearance, going that 9-3 with a trip to the Fenway Bowl and kind of just slumping to third in the American in 2022 probably wasn't great for him. I don't know if he made a mistake on Wisconsin. Well, he did make a mistake on Wisconsin, but I don't know exactly why the mistake happened. I don't know why it's not working at Wisconsin, but maybe he just needs a fresh face. Maybe he needs to go down to Penn State, a program where they're a slightly higher ranking program, in my opinion, than Wisconsin. Yes, Wisconsin's a big program. At Penn State, I think, is certainly a bigger program. He would have plenty of opportunities, just a fresh face, reset things, be able to bring in some talent, be able to do a whole lot. You'd probably be able to keep Jim Knowles there as well, potentially, and build around that. I don't think he's going to last the rest of the season at Wisconsin. Wouldn't be surprised they don't fire him at this point, considering they got pumped by Iowa in absolute embarrassing fashion this past weekend. So he'll probably be gone anyway. Maybe they leave split by mutual consent, so he takes the Penn State job. Keep an eye on Luke Fickell. Certainly, obviously, Penn State fans would not like this. They want to go for somebody else. They want some sort of home run hire, but I'm just not entirely sure what that would look like. Fickell would be a steady hand. He'd be able to get you a lot of wins, but maybe he would be the guy that's not able to get you over the top again, and you'd just be running in circles down there at Happy Valley. Certainly, need to keep an eye on though.
Now we're going to go ahead and move to one of Nick's candidates, a bit of another oddball. I don't really understand this one. Brian Kelly over at LSU. I think he's content over there, even though sometimes his facial expressions, I seen one against South Carolina, are, man, I'm sick of coaching this team. Like, it's kind of funny to watch because the silly mistakes. He just wants to punch a wall, I swear. The thing about him is he's a guy that can coach at a high level consistently. Maybe certainly he's going to get you to 10, 11 wins, kind of like Franklin, and that's going to be your cap. It's going to be hard for you to win a national title. It's kind of what you're seeing at LSU right now, where a very hyped team coming into the season is certainly gasping for air at this point in the year. But that's what you're going to get. Another guy who's going to get you 10 to 11 wins every single year. You know he's going to be able to recruit. 209 and 8 and 108, that is all-time record. I mean, that's what you're going to get, right, Nick? So it's kind of pretty much the same thing as Franklin, just you will do better in those big-time games. And that's really what Penn State is searching for. So maybe I could understand it in that realm. But in terms of a significant upgrade, will you really get one? Interesting candidate here. What's your explanation?
In my opinion, you're getting an upgrade if you take Brian Kelly. I just don't think the fit's quite working out at LSU. It always seemed like it was a weird fit when he took the job, and I think this LSU team is primed for a major letdown the rest of the season. I think LSU could potentially lose, two of the next three games against Vanderbilt, A&M, and Alabama. I think they lose at least one of those games, potentially two there, and that puts them in a bad spot the rest of the season. They still have a trip at Oklahoma late in the season as well, so I think LSU's going to miss the playoff at this moment in time, and I think that's just going to be enough for them to be like, hey, we want to split up as well and make something different happen here. He's been good at LSU, but not good enough, right? Two 10-win seasons, a 9-win season, three straight bowl wins, but they want to compete for national titles, and they've not been able to do so. I don't think he's a culture fit at LSU either. I think it's still been a weird fit. He was obviously a great guy at Notre Dame and was able to get a whole lot of that team, took them to a national title game, was able to get them super competitive in that moment in time, took them to the playoffs as well after that, two playoff appearances after that national title loss to Alabama. And I think he's a phenomenal coach, right? I think you would really be getting an upgrade there. I think he's a guy that could win at Penn State, a program like that where he get the unlimited resources and the backing. I know he's got great resources at LSU, but it just doesn't feel like he's able to get the most out of the talent down there and make things happen. I just think it would be a better fit for him somewhere else. I think he might know that as well. I think he might realize that, hey, this is not working out for me at LSU. Yes, I took an SEC job. I took a gamble here, but I'm more of a Northern coach. I'm more of a guy that's a better scheme-fitted program like Penn State. And I think it would be an upgrade for Penn State, right? You have to look at the names on the board and say who would be an upgrade on James Franklin. And there's not a lot of options, quite frankly, right? He was a coach that was really good, just could not get them over the top. Brian Kelly hasn't won that many big games, but he has won enough big games, obviously has been able to be competitive in the past, took this team to a national title previously at Notre Dame, that is, hasn't taken LSU to a national title. I think it would make a lot of sense, right? I think Brian Kelly would fit in there. I think it'd be a good culture fit. We'd be able to recruit and get a lot out of the talent here. I think this makes sense if you want to take a try at it. I think it makes sense for Brian Kelly to be like, hey, I'm going to split up from LSU. Hasn't worked out for me. I go take a new step and go try to get opportunity done in the Big Ten. I think it would really make a lot of sense for both parties.
Now, going to the final candidate, another one Nick threw at me, D'Anton Lynn. This one really doesn't make sense either. So definitely want to hear the explanation. Lynn, of course, a guy that comes from the Ravens coaching tree, spent a couple years on Harbaugh's staff, pretty much almost a decade in the NFL as some type of defensive coach. Went to UCLA in 23, did great work for that defense, one of the top-ranked run defenses in the country. He's been, he went from Westwood to Hollywood, right across the street to USC the last 2 years, and he's doing pretty solid work for the Trojans as well. 35 years old, has not been in the coaching ranks in college for just only a couple of years now. Nick, he's a young guy though, so if you want to find some young energy for your defense, that's certainly possible as well. I don't really have much to add because I don't really understand this one. I think Lynn's certainly growing in head coaching circles. I think it's still too early. Like, yeah, he's doing good for USC, but it's not like it's great in abundance. And I think it's more of a long-term project to continue to fix that defense. And I think he's going to be willing to stay instead of taking a head coaching job. And if he's going to take one, it'd probably be the Bruins, right? But I don't think this is a guy who should be getting coaching calls to be the lead man from anywhere, let alone Penn State.
I don't think he should be getting looks, but I've been hearing this. I saw this on multiple social media posts from respective beat writers that he was a name that was getting thrown out immediately. He went to Penn State, played there in the past. He was a cornerback at Penn State, had a really good career there. He is a great defensive mind, right? This is a guy that's a really good defensive coach. I think at 35 years old, you're getting a guy that you could really develop and mold into a high-value coach in the future. His defenses have been really good at UCLA and USC. Again, maybe if you find a way to keep Jim Knowles, then you can kind of pair those two together. I think that'd be a really good thing. He would bring high energy. He would bring a lot of tempo. I'm sure they want somebody a little more experienced here, but at this point, this is such an interesting job, in my opinion. This is such a kind of a weird thing where you feel like Penn State can go get anyone they want, but at the same time, you feel like a lot of those top candidates would not be interested. So I'm just kind of throwing guys out that I think could be interesting names, and I've seen this name a couple of times on social media, in a couple of different circles here, a guy that went to Penn State, so I think he's getting a look in that regard. It would be a gamble, right? You're certainly taking a gamble. You're taking a chance here, but I think Penn State has to take a chance. They have to go out and gamble because there's just not enough quality candidates considering there's a lot of jobs open. You got to go try and find something, make something happen. roll the dice a little bit here. You made the move. You fired Franklin. I don't think it would happen, but it's just a name I have to throw out. It's something to keep an eye on. Maybe they try and see what happens there, take a flyer on Lynn and see if they can mold him into a great head coach and a superstar guy for the future.
And to cap things off, I'll ask you, Nick, for a prediction on who the next Penn State head coach will be. Quite frankly, I don't really have one. If it's not going to be Matt Rule, who I'm really not sure they're going to be able to hire anyways, I'm not really putting my finger on who I think it will be. And if you don't have one either, give me a prediction on where James Franklin will be next year if it's not going to be on a beach enjoying all that money.
I think he'll be on television, quite frankly. I think James Franklin's molded for television. I think you find him on the Big Ten Network, maybe on ESPN in some capacity once this is all said and done. I feel good about Brian Kelly. I'm not going to sit here and say that's going to happen, but that's one I think can make a lot of sense. It would be a shocking move, but then again, it was a shocking move when Brian Kelly left Notre Dame to go to LSU. These things happen. There will be a lot of seismic shifts in college football this offseason. It's going to be a crazy coaching carousel, especially if some of those other high-profile jobs open up, and I think Brian Kelly would be a great fit at Penn State. Outside of that, it's really tough to pull names here because there's just so many guys out there that you could think potentially would be considered there, but I don't know if they would really take a look at it. Penn State's in a tough position here. I understand that they fired Franklin. I get it. You had to do it. A part of me thinks they have a guy in mind if they really made this move, but this is going to be a very puzzling job search and one to keep an eye on here. This is going to be a great coaching cycle for college football because a lot is going to change very quickly. Some new familiar faces will be in new places next year. It's going to shake a lot of things up. I don't have a confident pick. Brian Kelly, if I had to pick one, if you told me I had to make a pick, Brian Kelly will be the name I'll throw out. But man, this is going to be a very fascinating coaching search and a coaching carousel that will spin round and round and will be quite interesting this year.
I think you're looking at a spot where you could potentially be getting a lot of no's from your top guys. If Matt Rule says no, then I think our candidates are quite frankly pretty realistic. And I think Fickle would be very interesting. I'd like to see that. I think that'd be cool to witness. But like you said, very interesting. And things don't always work out like they should when it comes to the coaching realm. Remember a couple years ago, that whole thing when the LSU and USC jobs were open, nobody thought that it would go the way it did. So if it was just this easy and Matt Rule would get the call and he'll sign the contract instantly, then we wouldn't have to be doing this, Nick. So I don't think it's going to play out the way people probably think it is. It's just not how coaching works with all these jobs and so many moving pieces. So I think it will ultimately be a bit of an interesting saga, and maybe we'll be wrong at the end of the day, but I don't think so. I think this will be quite odd to see play out.
Yeah, it's similar to like Alabama when that opened up after Nick Saban retired. There were a lot of big names on the board: Dan Lanning, Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian, a lot of those guys. And I don't know how many of those guys actually said no. I don't know how many of those guys Alabama actually pursued. But you threw out a ton of names as soon as Saban retired, and they ended up going with Kalen DeBoer, who I didn't think was the top name on a lot of people's list, and it's obviously starting to work out a little bit. It was a little shaky last year, and there's still a ton of football left to play, but Alabama and Kalen DeBoer look to be in a decent shot here. There's a lot of names you can throw out there. Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri is a name that some people will certainly look at for some of these top jobs. Some of those other guys, obviously Rhett Lashley, we talked about for the Arkansas job. There's a lot of different names out there. A guy at Silverfield at Memphis. There's a lot of different names out there, a lot of interesting candidates. It's going to be a very interesting cycle, and I'm curious to see how it all ends up. We'll certainly break down everything when it happens, so certainly stay tuned for that. But wow, this is going to be a lot of fun.
So we have for today's episode. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.